Welcome back, guys. In this video, we're going to continue the presentation on combining strength training and combat performance, as well as looking into how we can navigate this whole landscape of, nutrition and fat loss and those kinds of things. And this is where we left off last time, where we discussed things ranging from energy availability to, I suppose almost the clusterfuck of a society that is nutrition. And we left off with this slide here saying that a healthy athlete is a well-performing athlete. And hopefully, since you watched the very first one, this is now sunk in and you're starting to understand that, in order to perform really well, you really have to make sure that you are healthy first. And that goes from nutrition to sleep to hydration and everything else. So from here, let's say, I think we can all agree that simply removing calories and increasing exercise without us actually thinking about why we're doing this can have a lot of consequences. Whether you are a hobby athlete, an elite athlete, or simply someone who's looking to lose weight, feel better, be a better dad or mum, or maybe even wanting to do your sport long term, we still got to remember that this can have negative consequences. So we need a lot of forethought as to why we are doing what we're doing. So how the hell do we translate this into, I suppose, quote unquote, performance? The first thing that I do as a coach is always to ask myself, what is the purpose of this training session? Because if someone is training for skill development, let's say that someone is training for agility or certain throws or takedowns, and that is the focus of that training session, compared to, let's say, maximizing anaerobic power, then the way we're going to fuel that session and what comes before and after that session in terms of maybe strength training, rolling, sparring, those kinds of things are going to be vastly different. And what I have to think about as well as a performance nutritionist is, how do I feed this or these sessions to further create the, I suppose, performance that we want, or I suppose more esoterically, how do we further foster the purpose of that session? In the sense that if someone wants to maximize power training or strength training and the adaptations from that, the way in which I fuel that training session is probably going to be slightly different, or sometimes vastly different, compared to a recovery session or a skill development session. So these are the first things that you really do need to consider when you are trying to set up a plan for yourself, or whether that's training or food or whatever it might be. So if we want to achieve all of this, guys, and really get the outcome of, I suppose, almost being unbreakable, we need to have a lot of planning in place. And planning doesn't mean that you don't adapt. That's actually why you have a plan in place, so you can adapt if things, change. Let's say that you get sick, or all of a sudden you have to travel for work, or maybe you end up getting gastro because you have to fly overseas to Abu Dhabi and compete there, right? So we need a plan in place so that it makes it easier for us to adapt whenever needed. So let's say that we were working off a 12-month time frame. And I'm going to go into depth a lot more about this in a separate lecture one day. But we often use a 6-step process. And this goes for any kind of time frame. But here we worked off a 12-month time frame for you. So let's say that in 12 months you wanted to lose 15 or 20 kilo, which isn't that hard to do. It requires a lot of work, but it's easily doable. The first thing we have to do is, from a nutrition point of view, we need to determine the rate of fat loss. So how fast do you actually want to lose that weight? Is it healthy for you to lose that weight at, let's say, 1% per week, or is that maybe too much or too little? And then from there, we go in and we determine the calories that we need to eat in order to lose that fat. And then we play around with that in terms of, on your training days, you're going to eat differently. The food timing is different, and those kinds of things. And then, depending on the person, some people work really well off a strict meal plan where they weigh their food. They can choose between lamb, bison, chicken, salmon, beef, whatever it is for each meal, but they have certain, grams that they have to hit of each single food source, whereas others don't. Like the majority of people, to be honest, probably don't need that. They need a flexible framework so they can navigate all the settings that they have available, right? And then from there, regardless of what method we choose to use, if we don't monitor how the person responds and adapt accordingly, then we're going to run into some issues. And then, of course, I think one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people make is that they don't plan their maintenance days or weeks. People like to go balls to the walls all the time, but they don't like planning the recovery side of things, whether that's cold showers, stretching, meditation and breathing, dropping the intensity and volume of training for a week or two. And one of the main things here, guys, is you have to remember that regardless of, whether or not you are training for high performance, whatever it is, everything affects the central nervous system. And the central nervous system dictates, how well you function. So that fifth step is incredibly important. And of course, we are big proponents of minimalist training, and you're going to see why that is very, very soon. So here's step one. Again, this is where, based on how active you currently are and how much body fat you're carrying around, we need to navigate how fast you're going to be losing that body fat every single week. If you're much leaner and you're only sitting around 10% body fat, then of course, we can't go as hard as someone who's got 30% body fat, right? That makes a lot of sense. So this step here is very, very important. And here you'll see two different examples where in the first one here, let's say this is Tom, he's 42 years old, he's reasonably active, let's say that he's doing about 7,500 steps a day, maybe a gym session here and there. And we know that his body fat percentage is 20%. You want to get down to 15. From here, if he wants to lose about 0.25% of his body weight per week, which is about 220 grams a week, he needs to diet for almost 30 weeks, eating about 2,200 calories. Now here we got Ben. Let's say Ben is 27 years old. They're weighed the same because I didn't change that. But Ben is a lot more active. So he's doing between 10 to 15,000 steps a day. And he's got the same body fat percentage, but he wants to go down to 15 as well. But he's decided now to lose 1% of his body weight per week. So that means that he's going to be losing nearly 1 kilo per week. And he only needs to diet for 7 weeks, eating slightly less calories because he's so much more active than what Tom is. So here you'll see a couple of practical examples as to why we want to, take all this here into consideration. Then, of course, you saw just then in the fat loss calculator those two images that, hey, we can determine pretty accurately, the number of calories that you need to eat. But remember that all of this here is not static. It's not that here's a number, then we're going to stick to that regardless. That's not how things work. It's very, very dynamic. So all these calculations and calories and everything, that's just a starting point. That person might be the person who actually need to eat less than that, or maybe they just need to move a lot more than the next person to get the same result. But at least we know where to start the person, and that's the most important thing. And then, of course, with what you saw earlier on these photos, then some people might just want to track that in MyFitnessPal. Whereas others, they just might not even have to start there. In the back end, I can do all of that work, and then we work out a framework where they use things like fist sizes, palm sizes, thumb sizes, cupped handfuls, and those kinds of things, where they don't even have to worry about counting a single calorie. Cool. So Once we've figured all this stuff out, the next thing you really do have to consider is what is practical for you. Do you have a good relationship with food? Are you worried about counting calories? Is that obsessive for you? If it is, don't fucking do that. There are other ways of doing that, right? But if it works for you, then it works for you. And then this is what we spoke about. If someone is losing weight too fast or too slow, we have to readjust those calories. If you're dropping way too fast, then all of that is probably not going to be body fat. We're probably talking, of course, water, but some muscle mass as well. We want to minimize that. So then we might want to add a bit of calories back into your days, right, to mitigate that loss. It might be a bit slower, but the end result is going to be a lot better. And then, vice versa, if the scales just aren't shifting, we got to do a bit of detective work here, right? So we got to make sure that we are looking at things like, hey, what are you doing on the weekends? That bottle of wine, did you know that there's a lot of calories in that? And vodka still has calories in it, right? It's not like just because it's see-through, it doesn't have any calories in it. So we got to make sure that we're continuously monitoring and readjusting wherever needed. And this here is something that I'm very, very big on, and that is recovery. And I would rather see someone train twice a week, have more energy, recover really well from those training sessions, and be able to do more throughout the day, spend more time in this instance, training skills for combat training and, spending time with their families and those kinds of things, instead of trying to train 6 days a week, even though it's not necessary. And you, as a big part of this, you need to look at your schedule, your circumstances, what it is that you're really after. And then from there, you can plan and, adjust your training and recovery means accordingly. Because at the end of the day, guys, if you can't recover from it mentally or physically, everything is pretty darn useless. And of course, the sixth step is minimalist training. I really do believe that that is the way to go for the majority of people, where you train in the gym twice a week, that's it, no more. You have 3 to 4 exercises per day, no more. There is no need for these, 14 exercise training programs. That's just a fucking waste of time. And on your strength days, if you're training for just pure strength, not strength endurance, then you're going to be doing no more than a total of 10 reps. So, one day that could be 2 sets of 5. Another day you go and it could be 2 sets of 4, then 1 set of 2 reps. That's a total of 10, but no more than 10. And on your power days, because on power days you're moving a lot faster and lighter, so we have a bit of room for doing a bit more repetitions here. So we don't want to do any more than 20 reps. This here is the basis of a lot of our training philosophy when it comes to athletes. Of course, we have to readjust these things based on each person and those kinds of things. But if you do this, you're going to have so much energy and get so strong and powerful that I'm going to feel quite sorry for your opponents. So here's a couple of example programs. I'm going to let you guys look at those in your own time. And of course, if you go to our YouTube channel, or if you're already a client, all of these exercises here will be in your video course as well. But some of these exercises are also on our YouTube channel. So there you go, guys. That's it for this second part of the lecture. So hopefully now, over the last 2 lectures, you've learned more about combining strength training and fat loss with combat sports. We always talk about guidelines of being able to, squat and pull up a lot of weight and being able to be powerful and those kinds of things. And we are achieving that across the board with the majority of people. And this is how we actually do that. So if you are fatigued, you're struggling making progress with your training, and you just want to have more energy for your combat training, but you still want to go to the gym and become more, I suppose, stronger and more powerful, then this here is the absolute way to go, guys. So that's it for this. If you have enjoyed this, I would greatly appreciate a share online or a comment below if you're seeing this on YouTube, and then we will see you very, very shortly, I'm sure.